Welcome to the second podcast in my Thoughts with Lakshman podcast series. In this podcast, I'm going to be talking about German immigration in the original 13 English colonies, specifically with Pennsylvania, because that's where most German immigrants settled in. I'm also going to be talking about the influence of World War I and World War II on um, the remains of German culture in America. And yeah, so many people don't actually know this, but Germans were the largest group of immigrants into the English colonies, other than African Americans and obviously colonists from England. And also African Americans were forcibly brought to the New World. So, and there were so many Germans. I think they made up nearly 12% or more than maybe 12 to 13% of the population in the colonies. And many of the Germans who immigrated to the New World enjoyed the religious freedom in the colonies because for the time, the colonies were actually very liberal compared to the rest of the world with religion. And that's just generally. Specifically, the religious freedom in Pennsylvania was especially attractive for many Germans because Pennsylvania was probably the most liberal of the 13 colonies, and the 13 colonies collectively were pretty liberal compared to the rest of the world. And the main reason that Pennsylvania was um, so inclusive religiously is because their founder, William Penn, and also proprietor, believed in religious freedom. He was a Quaker. Now, William Penn actually grew up in England, and he enjoyed a very comfortable life. Um, as Penn grew older, he developed beliefs that differed from many um, of his fellow Englishmen. And Penn's father was also a successful businessman in England. Penn was a Quaker. His beliefs were, like I said, they differed from many in England, and he believed that everyone was truly equal. He believed in religious freedom, and he believed in a democratic government. And Quakers in England were not very well respected, um, and Penn was a Quaker. A lot of times, Quakers in England were actually prosecuted and arrested. Now, around this time, as Penn grew older, because Penn became a Quaker in his late teens, that's when he became more aware. And around this time, in the 1670s, I couldn't find an exact date, but Penn's father passed away. Now, the English government actually owed a lot of debt to Penn's father. And instead of asking the English government to pay the debt owed to his father, Penn requested a charter to establish a colony in the New World. And Penn wanted a charter to establish a new colony in the New World because he wanted to create a safe haven for Quakers. So the English government approved of Penn's request, and because it was cheaper for them, and the Pennsylvania colony was formally founded by William Penn on March 4th, 1681. Like I said, Penn formed Pennsylvania to provide a safe haven for Quakers. Now, unlike other English colonies in the New World, Penn actually paid European agents to advertise the democratic government and religious freedom in his colony. Now, Penn's ideals were they especially resonated in Germany, where the number of German immigrants in Pennsylvania actually alarmed the Provincial Council of Pennsylvania. So Penn's advertising actually worked too well in Germany, and the Provincial Council of Pennsylvania actually feared that the official language of the colony might switch from English to German. Um, and as a result, many Germans were required to, I guess that you could call it an oath. They had to repeat an oath. So first off, when a ship came in, and I read actually that nearly over 1,500. They said nearly 5 ships a month came in with over 300 German immigrants. I guess that adds up to around 1,500, give or take. But these ships came in, and bells would ring, so everyone knew that new immigrants were coming in Pennsylvania. And it was quite a scene. A lot of people actually gathered to watch the new immigrants come off the ship. And what started to happen was German men, while women and children were left behind in the boat, German men actually had to come forward. And generally speaking, a lot of immigrants to the colonies came with their families. So in this case, men represented their families. So German men would come forward, they would repeat an oath, and they would sign documents stating that they would follow English regulations and laws, because that's all that Pennsylvanians feared. They feared that Germans might come and they might try and take over, and they might like not listen to anything that to any laws or regulations in Pennsylvania. So they made sure that Germans signed an oath, and they didn't sign an oath. They repeated an oath, and they signed a document stating that they would follow it. And these documents are actually why we historians have been able to um, set up. I mean, those documents are one of the main reasons why historians actually are able to know that um, there were so many Germans in Pennsylvania, because Germans actually signed their name in German. So it also showed colonists that those German immigrants had some form of immigration in Germany before coming to the New World. Now, um, Germany, um, now, one of the main, I guess you could call generalizations made by historians on the New World, on the English colonies in the New World, was that they granted religious freedom. And this wasn't really the case in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, because you had Puritans who had escaped England because they they were unhappy with the Church of England and how inclusive it was for Catholics, and they wanted to practice their branch of Protestantism, and they wanted to tie it closely to the government. So they didn't. So in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, religious freedom wasn't really granted, but across the board in many colonies, there was a lot more religious toleration in the colonies than there were in many other major countries at the time. And Germans enjoyed this. Germans were Protestants. And they enjoyed, well, not all Germans were Protestants, but they tended to be Protestants, and they enjoyed the religious freedom in Pennsylvania. Now, what's interesting and unique about German immigrants compared to the Scots Irish or French immigrants or Dutch immigrants in the New World was that Germans brought their other groups of immigrants, like the French, the Dutch, the Scots Irish. They adjusted more so to the colonial culture. They tried to learn how to speak English. They tried to adapt. Germans weren't like that. Germans brought their own language and their own ways of handling life and day to day things with them to the New World. And you could really describe German communities in uh, the English colonies as simply German culture being transplanted on American soil. And this German immigration actually can connect back to the present, because 1 out of every 4 Americans actually had German ancestors. And Donald J. Trump also is he has German ancestors, and he's our president. Um, Another interesting part about German influence in the colonies was that because there were so many Germans in the colonies, German and like I said, Germans in the English colonies continued to maintain their language, their culture, their traditions, their customs. Um, German was the primary foreign language in in schools in the United States before the revolution. After, there were obviously more schools after the revolution, but up until First World War, German was by far the the primary foreign language in colonial schools. And after World War One, there was a really big anti, really large anti-German sentiment in the United States, and this became even less. This increased even more after World War Two, and as a result, many schools in the United States stopped offering German as a language. They wanted, you could see less um, parts of German culture in the United States after the World Wars. So, some stats I actually found from my German online course, and I remembered noting them down because I thought they were super interesting. So, before World War One, over 70% of American schools offered German as a foreign language, and after World War Two, this number dropped to only 13%, which is remarkable. And I wanted to see if I could find any um, statistics on the percent of high schools that offer today in the United States. I couldn't find anything definitive because I found like three or four things that were different, but all of them were in the range from 15 to 25%. And I think that's really interesting because it kind of relates to me because I changed schools after my freshman year in high school, and I was going to take German as my second language. So I'd taken Latin previously, and I'd switched to Spanish in ninth grade, and I wanted to take German as a second language. So the summer before my sophomore year, I did tons of German. I spent a lot of time. I really enjoyed it, and I got up to German three in 3 months. So I made really quick progress, and my family moved, and we moved to a school where German wasn't offered. So I've been taking online German courses, and I think it's interesting because I did some research on it, and there weren't many schools around us that actually offer German. I think French and Spanish are a lot more common in American high schools today, and now I kind of figured out from reading on this that the main reason why is the anti-German sentiment in the United States after World War One and World War Two. Um, so I think that's interesting. I think though this number will continue to increase because we've seen an increase recently because I think it was 13% after World War Two, and the data I found says around 15 to 25% today. And I think just as advancements are made with schools, also online schools provide a great opportunity with language learning. There are serious flaws with online language learning, but specifically that a lot of courses are created by native Germans, and I think if a course is created by a native German, it makes it like I think it's almost better for someone who wasn't a native German speaker, but like learned and mastered the language, and they taught how they learned it. I think that's more valuable to someone who's not a native German speaker because the process that they went through to master the language was different than the process that a native went through. Because there are parts of German, like for instance, the speaking and the listening, talking it. That's also relates back to Pennsylvania colony and how some colonists, some Pennsylvanians, I guess you could call them, feared that German might become the official language of Pennsylvania because German's a complicated language to speak, and you can't really do that online. So you're still losing out on a lot from not having German offered in schools, but I think it will increase over time, and um, and yeah, I think it will increase over time, and I think online opportunities give students the opportunity to get, I guess, like basics in the language, get like become advanced at reading and writing the language because you can do that. Um, because German and also English are very pretty similar in a lot of ways. There are a lot of They're both Germanic languages, and there are many, many English words are that have German roots, along with Latin roots, but many English words that have German roots, and also the sentence structure in both German and English is similar. And I guess you could, I yeah, I guess you could partially say that's because of German influence in um, in history, along with English-speaking countries. I'm not entirely sure about that, but I think that we've come to a good point in my podcast, and yeah, I think I'm going to end it here. So I hope you enjoyed listening to my podcast. This was the second episode of Thoughts with Lakshman, and it's titled "German Immigration into the English Colonies." Just as a quick recap, we talked about first. I talked about a bit on German immigration into the English colonies, why they came, because they were Protestants, they enjoyed the religious freedom, and they specifically immigrated to Pennsylvania. I then um, discussed William Penn in the Pennsylvania colony, his background in England. He's a Quaker, how he wanted to form Pennsylvania as a safe haven for Quakers, and how he secured the charter for Pennsylvania because of the debt owed to his father. Um, Also, Penn advertised his colony in Europe, and that's really what helped attract many Germans to the colony. We also spoke about German influence in the colonies in terms of being the primary foreign language up until World War I. But then the anti-German sentiment that formed in the colonies really decreased this. Is the number of schools, the percentage of schools offering German in the United States decreased from 70% to around 13%. And then we finished off discussing similarities between German and English and online German, I guess, because and how the number of schools offering German increased recently. Thank you for listening to my podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you again.